Well, hello everyone, and welcome back for yet another episode of the Waterlife Debrief podcast. We are so excited to be back with you here today, and by we, I mean myself and our lead pastor, Todd Braswell. So good to be back at the table with you. We have had an eventful last couple of weeks, and it just feels like so long since we've been in our normal swing of things.
Yeah, 2 weeks of snow, ice, no school for the parents. Their kids probably driving you crazy. And then, just getting back to church last Wednesday, we were back up and running with our groups and things. But being back today was great.
Yes.
I didn't like being out, did not like being on camera. Even though it's great, we got technology for that. It's good to be back. So,
Right.
yeah, it's a good day.
Yeah,
Good day to be in
it was
God's
a good
house
day.
and good to be
Celebrated
back.
baptism, so what a way to just
Yeah.
come out with a bang on this wonderful Sunday morning. that
It
we
was
had.
good. It was
11
good.
baptisms.
And, lots going on. And, if I could just plug right away for everybody today before we go any further,
Yeah.
get excited about, what God's doing in the church, but where we're going as a church as we head toward Easter. Because, as we record this, today is Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah.
Well, for the Christian, Easter's the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
the
that's
empty
right.
tomb's the big deal.
Yep.
And with that, we are trying to really get our hearts prepared and get our people mission-minded for Easter. And so, as we said, and we've been saying, and I want to say it again, we're going to be having 33 days of prayer and Bible reading. We're asking everybody to go through that. Students, children that are old enough to read, and adults, we're going to read the Bible together. And we kick that reading off on March 4th, which is a Wednesday, and it goes all the way to Easter Sunday morning. So we've got these great bookmarks we're going to be giving out a week before, and everybody can go through and just check them off, and we'll be able to read the Bible together and pray together. And we are talking about 33 days. There were 3 nails, 3 days, right,
Yep.
till the empty tomb. So we're
Yep.
rolling with 33.
Yep.
And
Good
then
number.
we're doing these Wednesday night services. So I was talking to the worship team today about what those are going to look like. But I'm like, yeah, these are like normal, like a Sunday morning service that we do with the band and welcome and prayer time and all this kind of stuff, teaching and whatnot, worship. And we're going to do that for those 5 Wednesdays in a row where we're preaching through Holy Week, and we're going to be praying a lot at every service. We're also going to be, thinking about wanting to get people in the mode of, who's that lost person that that needs to come to know Jesus, and we're going to be praying for them, doing some things, and then we'll take the Lord's Supper the last Wednesday night before Easter, or just getting in the mode of the cross and the empty tomb. So I'm really excited about doing that, and I think some really good things are going to come from that when we all sit down and get on the same page as a church family, and so we're reading the Bible together, we're praying together, we're participating in these services. So I really, really want to challenge everybody. Like, look, it's just like everything. Make it a priority.
Yes.
Put it on your schedule.
Yes.
And come to these things. Man, we want a big crowd on Wednesday nights. We want everybody participating. So make every effort to be there and be strategic. These are great opportunities to invite somebody maybe that's not in church, these Wednesday night activities, or people that can't come on Sundays because maybe they work on Sunday. It's a great opportunity.
That's a lot of people,
It is. We've had quite a few folks here that's their dilemma, and so they watch online, but man, they can come out for that. So it's going to be a good time. So we're excited about heading toward Easter. Of course, we've got Ted Cunningham coming up in a couple weeks, and I think that's pretty much sold out, but we're excited about that, and all the other things. There's a women's conference coming up in May. Of course, you know about that. We'll be talking about that more in the coming days. But Easter's the big thing right now.
Oh, yeah.
Driving towards Easter, and 33 days of prayer and Bible reading with these extra services. It's going to be a really powerful 5 weeks, I think. So I'm excited about that.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, you've been doing a good job of getting everybody fired up. So now they just have to show up, and we're just excited to get together with our church family, even outside of Sunday mornings, and just dive into the Word a little bit more, and just be on the same page and do that together. And it's going to be a really fun time. I'm looking forward to it. So,
well, and also there's one thing I want to plug. I want to make a plug today to the Waterlife people out there. I try to read as much as I can, and I have just read this book. And it is called Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion, from Allie Beth Stuckey. Now, if you don't know who she is, Allie Beth is basically a female Charlie Kirk. And she is a great Christian lady and bold and knows how to take on these issues. And this book is so good. Tell them what we're doing with the book.
As a staff, we are walking through the book. We're going to be reading the book and walking through it as a staff.
Yes.
Because these are issues that we all face.
Yeah, and with this book, it shows exactly, like when I look back over the last 7 years or so with preaching and people's pushback and the emails and this, that, and the other, every bit of it is what she's talking about in this book. How well-meaning Christian people get a wrong definition of empathy and it becomes toxic, and it's not a godly thing. And so she talks about these issues. She talks about it from a scriptural perspective about what the truth. So it's a really good exercise to talk about all these issues that we see out there that get people so inflamed, where our culture is gone, where the Bible sits. But it's a really great book. So for those of you that read, it's a great read. Get that book. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon.
One of those websites.
Toxic Empathy, and Allie Beth Stuckey. I think it's a great book. It's worth a read.
I'm excited to dive into it.
It's worth a read if you want a biblical world view. So important on that.
For sure.
Anyway, so that's just one little quick plug on that. I did want to plug that a little bit because we're going to read it as a staff, but I would love for people in our church to read that book too, because it's really, it really says, oh, when you read it, you're like, oh, yeah, there it is. That's the problem. So.
I'm going to go ahead and say that I can actually get the link to that on Amazon, and I can put it into our little summary on our YouTube video. So if people want to go check out the book on Amazon, I can actually take care of that.
Can you put the link out there to my book? All Aboard the Crazy
I don't
Train?
know about that. That's taking it a little
I don't
too
have
far.
A book yet. So
Not
anyway,
yet. Yeah,
not
the
yet.
keyword
Yeah.
yet.
There you go.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and just kind of dive into what we talked about today, and just
wait a second.
Okay.
Wait a second. So
maybe not.
Before we go there, you started preaching today.
Oh, right.
Come on, get fired up. You started talking about numbers
God
and all.
is good.
And
I can't help it.
I know it. I got tickled with that. But it made me think of something that I've seen my whole ministry that's really funny. So you were talking about today, like, people push back sometimes on the bigger churches. It's all about numbers.
By the way, those were our friends, Josh Howerton and Joby Martin, that were chatting about that. The mega church thing. Yeah, of course.
Well, and that's the thing that's been around a long time. Like, well, and it's almost like the philosophy is, if your church is big, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
And what people will say, and this is an arrogant statement, because, like, well, they're drawing a crowd because it's all about entertainment.
Yep.
Now, first of all, let's just stop there. That logic to me is hysterical, because what you're saying is, we know if you're being faithful to God, the logic runs like this, then it must be a miserable experience. If people hate going to church, you're doing it right. So I don't understand that. We saw this morning in Mark 2, Jesus draws a crowd.
Yep.
The Bible talks about people running to meet Jesus. They were delighted when they saw him. Like, look, I find that funny that, like, there's this mentality that if it's like a root canal, somehow you're doing it right. I don't get any of that, but that's kind of how people are. It's all entertainment. Well, first of all, that's also a pretty arrogant, self-righteous statement to judge a bunch of people that you don't know.
Yeah.
But people tend to do that. But then I'll question, why on earth would you not want your church to grow? There's something wrong with you if you don't want your church to grow.
Yep.
Like, I think the person should want that one more. It's always about the numbers of one more, because we're supposed to be making disciples. So the person that's in a church of 20 should be looking for 21.
Right.
A church is 50, 51. Church is 100, 101. Church is 1,000, 1,001. Like, we should always be trying to advance the ball to see people come to know Jesus Christ. So I love what you said, but I just think back of some of the pushback I've received over the years too about Waterlife, and it's it's entertainment and blah blah blah. And this,
so
that,
glad
and
you
the
didn't listen.
Well,
so
no, we
glad
don't listen
we're
to
just
that.
and I'm just so thankful. I mean, every Monday we sit in staff meeting, and it's just talking about first of all, we give all of our plans to God, and we're just like, everything we do, we just want to honor you in everything that we do, and so that's what we're doing every single step of the way. And thankfully, people come and we're able to worship together, but we're just going to keep doing our thing,
Yeah, we're
worshiping
watching,
the Lord.
like even today, look at the people being baptized today. That was across the age generational group.
Yep.
I mean, that's fantastic what God's doing. So
Yep, absolutely.
I'm always about,
Thankful to
like,
be a
we're going to
part
be
of it.
unapologetic about looking for that one more. So
Because
there
they're
you go.
out there. We
There you
know
go.
that. We've still got
Indeed.
work to do.
Indeed.
So, yep. All right. Well, we're trucking forward into Origin series. And today we were in the book of Mark, and you highlighted one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was telling Tracy earlier that Chris and I just got done watching this episode in The Chosen.
Oh, yeah.
So whenever you were like giving the illustration, you can literally just like
Oh,
see
did
it
they-
because
and
it's
they covered
depicted.
that?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like depicted that whole entire story. And so it was really cool. So anyways, I love hearing that story. And so why don't you kind of just give us a little overview of the story today for those of maybe haven't seen it yet.
So Jesus is teaching. He's healing. He's drawing a crowd because people are coming to get their needs met. You've got 4 friends that have the faith to believe that if we can get our friend to Jesus, he's going to be healed. The guy's paralyzed, so they have to carry him there. So they put all this effort forward to bring them to Jesus with the faith of knowing, like, if we can just get him to Jesus, he's walking home.
Right.
I love that.
We're not going to have to do this twice.
Right. I love that. So they get there, of course, then they, oh no, there's too much of a crowd. They can't get close to Jesus. So these guys do some as I call it, redneck engineering, problem solving, they decided to go up on the roof, and they literally cut a hole in the roof. They go to the nth degree to tear off the roof to lower this guy in front of Jesus. And it says at that point, when Jesus saw their faith, the guys on the roof, then he talks to the man and he says, your sins are forgiven, which made everybody confused.
Right.
Because they're like, well, wait a minute. Well, he's paralyzed. That's the bigger need. But as we said this morning, Jesus is making a point and teaching us something very important, that everybody, you, Natalee, me, all of us, our greatest need is to be forgiven, and that's what Jesus was doing. Now, and he goes on, and he's got the religious critics there that don't like that, because you can't do that. Only God can forgive sins. And then Jesus, starts messing with them with which is easier. Is it easier to say you're forgiven? Is it easier to say, take up your mat and walk? And the reality is, logically, it's easier to say you're forgiven, because there's just really no proof whether that happened or not. But if you try to, tell somebody they're healed and they can't get up, you're a fraud, right? And so Jesus is like, I'll show you from the hard one, and I'll show you that it's going to prove I can do both of them. And so, of course, the guy gets up and walks. And Jesus is illustrating in that point that, yes, our greatest need is to be forgiven, but he is the one. And he is the only one. I hope people got that today. He is the only one that can meet that need, because he's the only one that paid the price for our sin. He's the only one that was able to make a way through the empty tomb, what he did on the cross. And so, we really challenge people today about, look, has Jesus met that need? This is the most important question in life. We're not here by accident. We're designed to be in a relationship with God. Sin's the barrier for that. Only Jesus can fix that. So what are we going to do? Are we going to turn and trust Jesus? Are we going to turn and trust him like we see in the story? Or are we going to reject him? Because that shapes life today, shapes eternity. So anyway, that was the main point today, was just understanding, like, look, we all have needs in life, but the greatest need is to be forgiven, because we're all sinners. And Jesus is the one who can meet that greatest need. He's the only one that can. And so wise people are going to turn and trust Jesus with their lives. And that's going to shape life today. That's how Jesus talks about a full life. That's how we experience his plan and purpose and a relationship with him. And that shapes where you end up in eternity.
Right.
And eternity is a long time, and hell's not a fun place. I don't care what AC/DC says about it.
Right.
It's not going to be a party.
Yes.
And so heaven's way better, and we only get there not because we're perfect, not because we get there because we're forgiven people. We've experienced God's grace. And that's just, it reminds us of the goodness of God, just all these big things. But the seriousness, that's a serious thing. And I hope everybody left with, the assurance of making that decision. I talked to one friend after church today that wanted to speak to me, and they were talking about, a little bit of that struggle with, wondering where they saved. I said, well, you don't need to go around in life wondering. I mean, have you called on God? Have you trusted him? Because that's his promise.
Right. And
he said, well, I prayed again. I said, well, you've got to go forward. If you honestly did that, you got to trust what his word says. Because if you're forgiven, you're forgiven, right? So that's kind of where we went with that. And, that's one of those stories that you could kind of teach something on the friendship aspect, being a mat carrier. You can touch something about just preaching the word. You can touch stuff about the main part of the message. So it's kind of a neat story, like a neat account from Jesus' life, and that there's different angles for it that I think that are really, really helpful. So I love that story. I mean, I've always loved that, and I just love what Jesus does there. And it's just cool. Yeah.
I always look at that. I'm like, can you imagine actually being there for that? Like being someone in the crowd to witness that. Being
they were fired up at the end.
Absolutely. So. I mean, that would just be absolutely amazing. So so what we'll do today is we're just going to kind of take it piece by piece, like kind of how you broke down your sermon. Because like we said, there's so much rich content in there. So we're going to kind of break it down a little bit. But definitely, first of all, today, we just want to talk about friendships. And because, relationships, we're meant for relationships. We're meant for community. And so obviously, we're going to interact with people. We're going to have friendships. And today during the sermon, you said it's so important to have those mat carrier friends. Yeah. And so that's one thing that I wanted to talk about as we think about the friends. It's like, what amount of faith did they have to have, or like motivation did they have to have versus, the guy on the mat, how much faith did he have to have, for Jesus to perform that miracle for him? Yeah,
well, I guess the way I read it, it begins with their faith, right? Because we don't get an indication that the Bible just says the four brought their friend to Jesus. And then we've got the other clue that Jesus says Jesus saw their faith. So we know the four had faith to go to the nth degree to think, hey, man, if I can get I called him Jimmy John. If you can get Jimmy John, if you can get him to Jesus, he's going to be healed. And so they've got that element of faith. But what's interesting there, at the end, when Jesus tells him to get up and walk, he's got to take his own step of faith, right? So it's the same thing. Like we talk about our greatest need being forgiveness, and only Jesus can meet our need. My mom talked about praying for me from the time I was a boy that I would be saved. I know Becky and I did that for our children. We're praying for our grandchildren
Right.
about that all the time. Like you can can grow up in a home, Natalie, where your parents love Jesus, grandma loves Jesus, everybody loves Jesus, but their faith doesn't save you. You still have to make your own decision, right?
Right.
Every individual has to make the decision and has it on the table to say yes to Jesus or no to Jesus, right?
Right.
So, yeah, even though we have friends and that have faith and are trying to encourage us and push us towards Jesus, ultimately, we're still going to have that step of faith. And what's neat in the story, apparently, they all have some faith. So you got the 4 that had the faith. Hey, we're going to take our friend to Jesus because he's the answer and he can heal our friend. So we're willing to do whatever it takes,
They
tear
suck
off
at
the roof,
nothing.
as the song says and the
Yep.
story says, and get him to Jesus. And they're going to do that.
Yeah.
But then you've got the guy at the end who is willing to look at Jesus and say, okay. And he got up, took up his mat, and he walked home. He did exactly what Jesus told him to do. There was a step of trust there. And imagine, like, your legs don't work. I mean, somebody's telling you to get up. Like, I mean, that is a step of faith,
Yeah.
literally. So
Yeah.
I love that. So they both have faith, but it shows you the power too of just like, as we talked about this mat carrier thing and having people in our life that are truly those kind of friends that are always going to point you to Jesus. I heard this a long time ago, and the book of Proverbs teaches this, and our life experience will show this if we're honest, that the quality of your relationships will shape the quality of your life. And so that's true of like the quality of your friendships. Like the circle you travel with, whatever your tribe is, is either going to take you in a good direction or a wrong direction. Now, when I was a youth pastor, I used to talk to students about this all the time, and I used to talk about what I called the spiritual law of gravity, and that it was easier for people to pull us down than it is sometimes for us to pull them up, right? Yep. And so it's really important, like as we go through life, we have this balance of we want to reach out to people to point them to Jesus. We want our friends that are lost to get to Jesus. But those mat carriers in life need to be people that are like-minded, that love Jesus or following Jesus, and we're doing that together. We need that tribe. That's what the church is for. We need to be in groups. We need to have that circle of friends that we can do that. And a lot of times today, people don't understand that a mat carrier is the person that's going to point you to Jesus no matter what.
Yep.
And, and even in this book, I plugged the book again. Even in that book, there's that thing, that toxic empathy that says, well, I just don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and so I just want to give the thumbs up to whatever crazy life choice somebody's having. And the reality is, people do define friendship that way. Well, you don't support me. Well, no, I love you enough in Jesus to tell you that that's foolish or that's sinful or that's wrong.
Yeah.
Don't go there. See, that's really love. It's not this, I want to just give thumbs up and like everything and follow. No, it's not that. That makes you an accomplice. And you don't want an accomplice.
Yep.
You want a mat carrier.
Yep.
So I've had times in my life, there have been people that have had hard talks with me before and say, hey, what you're doing is not right, whether it's my parents or it was a mentor, some friends. Becky's done that a few times. We will stay out of that one today, but like your attitude stinks or whatever. And she's right about that.
Yep.
But she's always been pointing me to Jesus. Those are the people that really love us.
And you know that you can trust them too because you've built that relationship with them.
Right.
So if they're telling you that, it's for your good.
I'm always stunned sometimes that we have people all the time and I teach on this all the time, if all of your tribe, all of your circle that loves Jesus and loves you is telling you, like, let's say somebody's in a dating relationship and they're like, you need to run, Forrest, from him or from her.
Yep.
Like, everybody's telling you the same thing. You might want to listen to them. Right? You might want to listen to them. And so I think it's so important for us to have mat carriers in our life, the people that are always going to be willing, more than anything, because they love Jesus, to point us to Jesus. And if that means a hard conversation, that means, hey, look, man, I love you enough to tell you that's not wise. I love you enough to tell you that's sinful. Don't go down that path, right? I'm pointing you back to Jesus, or whether we do that for other people. That's a really powerful thing in life, and we all need that. We all need that,
for sure.
And because we all need to be in that point where we're just all trying to encourage one another. There's a verse in the Bible in the New Testament talks about in Hebrews, it talks about, let us not give up the habit of meeting together, and they were apparently getting slack with their church attendance and gathering. Yeah. And he goes on and he says, he gets like, get back to meeting, because he says, you should spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Like in that, we're pointing everybody in the right path, in the right direction. So we need those kind of people in life. And
that's why I always think it's so sad. Like sometimes you'll see, I'm infamous around the office for being on the what's going on. For being on the What's Going On Caldwell County page or whatever.
Listen, I'm telling you right now, that page is Well, don't we get me started on that.
Okay.
There's some
Well,
wokeness
yeah.
on that page.
Leave it out. But anyways, but I'm on there, and it's always sad to me because people will like post stuff on there about like good churches, blah, blah, blah. And people are like, I don't go to church. I have church by myself at home. That's all I need. It's between me and Jesus, etc., etc. It's like your relationship with Christ is something between you and Christ. But as far as growing in your relationship with God and maturing in your faith, and like you just said, having people to point you to God, because we're not meant to do life alone. It's so hard to, and you just catch yourself in these traps. And
yes, and the idea,
don't have to do that.
like if you were to pull back that early church, like the first disciples and stuff, after Jesus is resurrected, ascended back to the Father, and they're building the church and they're going and doing things. The idea of somebody saying that, they would have been, you're a lunatic. What are you talking about? And like as Christians, remember, we followed the example of Jesus, who had to be in his Father's house. And we see that pattern of him prioritizing worship, being in the synagogue.
And he had 12 best friends
being in the
that
temple,
followed him around all the time.
You beat me to it. And that's exactly right, Natalie. That's the answer.
Yep.
And he surrounded himself with a group of people, and he establishes this thing called the church. So that I'm gonna throw a flag on the play when somebody says that. Now I don't discount.
No pun intended with the Super Bowl today. No.
Yeah, you know I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Well, and now
I'm sorry you said the rabbit hole, but anyways, you were talking about people who say that they can do life by themselves because Jesus created the church.
Well, right.
And he had
it's
people
just,
with
I mean,
him.
that's just that would be such a foreign idea to the church, and I just look at that like, look. Flag on the play. Like if you love Jesus, I know you can have a bad church experience, but being a follower of Jesus means you follow the teachings and the example of Jesus. And if the New Testament is instructing us, calling us to set aside a day a week to worship, calling us to have fellowship with one another, not giving up the habit of meeting, if that was Jesus' example, well, then don't play that silly stuff about I'm going to sit home and watch TV.
Right, because they say that people are hypocrites, like people in the church are hypocrites.
Well, join the club.
And so, exactly, yeah. It's like, you go to church, and people do, that is what's sad. I'm like, people do come to church, paint on their face on Sunday morning, and they come and act a certain way, and then the rest of the week they're doing whatever they want, for lack of better words. And it is sad to see that sometimes. But again, like you said, like as Christians, we're not perfect people, and God is refining us, and we're going through every day, and we're each just trying to do better with what we have, and just through God's power, because we can't do it on our own strength, and we know that. So we keep coming, and then a lot of people, I'm like, we don't want you to come to church for your money. We don't want you to come to church as a service to us. We just know that everybody needs to come together to worship. And we're all called to do that. And so it's huge.
Mat carriers.
Yeah, exactly. So you talked about it's important to have those mat carrying friends, but it's also important for us to be mat carrier friends for others. So what are some ways that we can make sure that we're playing our part in those relationships?
Well, as we're doing life with people, you have to have the courage and the willingness to love people enough to have hard conversations. And a lot of people aren't.
I'm not good at that.
Well,
I'm
I know.
tell you right now.
And I think if for most of us, if you're the wrecking ball, that wants that, whatever. We're not talking about that, but like we should really care about our friends enough to do it. Now, how do you do that? We speak the truth in love. That's important, and how we do that. But you're willing to do that when there's those issues, to speak that way. Now, let's talk about being a mat carrier and pointing somebody else to Jesus. Because a lot of times people begin to say, well, I don't know enough about the Bible, and I don't know this, and how to tell somebody about Jesus. Well, think about it. First of all, you need to partner with the church. For those of us who come to Waterlife, they're going to hear the gospel.
Yep.
Might be a weird way, the way I do it, but it's a clear and direct way, right?
Today it was the Southern references.
It was the Southern references, because I'm a Southern man.
Yeah.
But they're going to hear that. So partner with the church in that. There's a thing that we heard years ago called invest and invite. Invest it in relationships with people and invite them to things like church. Now, one little tip I'll give people, that invite them at first to very non-threatening things. I don't feel like our church is very threatening, in the
just
we're
the
not
size
very,
for some
we're not
people.
very
That's
churchy,
what I've heard,
whatever, so it can have a different feel for people. But like, think about this Ted Cunningham thing. That is something you can have a couple that somebody you work with who's married, and you invite them to that marriage thing. And he's funny. He's not sure. That's a fairly non-threatening event.
Right.
But it's going to expose them to the teachings about Jesus, right? Sometimes we've got man camp things. You might be out having the bonfire. That's pretty easy for guys to invite their friends to. Now I'm going to speak about something, but it's pretty, it's pretty non-threatening.
Right.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff that our church has. These little strategic events you can invite somebody to do that help them start to get connected with somebody.
Right.
Strategic events. You can do that. I would suggest to people, like, always pay attention to the opportunities God gives you, because like I had one friend one time very, very resistant, and got burned by church one time a long time ago, and so real hostile towards this, and very, very, just not real positive on the Jesus and the church thing.
I gotcha.
But I was friends with him, really liked the guy, still do. But I would have opportunities because he would bring something up, and I would be paying attention. And a lot of times he brought things up that I'm like, oh yeah. You're not. I said, you're wrong about that. That's not right at all. I know people have that view, but that's not what Jesus says. And it would give me an opportunity to kind of share the gospel and say things to him. And I found, like with him, because he was so resistant, I just paid attention to natural opportunities that were in script. I mean, like in the conversation to speak into scripture, speak the truth about God. I also was smart enough to learn where, okay, that's enough for today. And so you sometimes have to know when to press on, when not to press on. That's something you don't want to miss an opportunity. I would hate to, have somebody that was lost and miss an opportunity. Also, with somebody that we know that's a good friend and that they're going down a bad path, conscience-wise, I would not want to, think, why didn't I warn them? Why didn't I say something, right? So look for those opportunities. I think another thing we could put in there about pointing people to Jesus is, man, pray. The power of prayer is a really important thing. And like pray. As long as I tell people all the time, like we know, let's talk about somebody that needs to be saved. We know from the Bible that that's God's heart and that's what he wants. Like I love in the book of 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter's writing about when Jesus is going to return, and they were like freaking out because they thought it was going to be right away, and they thought, well, what happened to Meemaw? She died, and like what does that mean for her? And is God not able to keep his promise? And he says, God is not slow in keeping his promise. It's a direct quote. As some understand slowness. In other words, he's saying, look, don't think God can't carry out his plan. That's not what this is about. And he says he's patient with you, which is good news. He's patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone, I love the play on words, but everyone to come to repentance. And then he goes on and says, but the day of the Lord will come. Like that patience will run out. There will be a day when all that's over. But he says, but God's goal, God's desire, his heart, because remember we talked about this today, because he paid the price and he made a way, right? His heart is for all people to be saved, okay? That's what he wants. So as long as someone is living and breathing, I don't care what path they're on, keep praying for them. You might have waded in trying to be a mat carrier and had a great conversation. You might have tried to invest and invite and get them to something, but they don't seem to want that. They don't want something to be hostile. Well, remember, trust your Father is working in their life and wanting to save them, and keep praying. As long as they have life and breath in their body, pray for them. Now, anytime I talk about that topic, I bring up Becky's grandmother. We called her Wheezy. And Wheezy, tough West Virginia woman, and she lived to be like 102 or something like that. She was old as dirt, but we loved her, and she was a spunky little thing.
From Becky's family, I can't believe
Becky's
that.
Family.
Wow.
They had prayed for her, for years, and we were at Thanksgiving one time when she was in her mid-90s probably. And she and I were sitting in cheap lawn chairs out in the driveway. It was kind of warm down in Columbia that Thanksgiving, and waiting for dinner. And we got into a spiritual conversation about that, and ended up leading her to Christ in that driveway. It was her time. But they had prayed for her for years. And we baptized her at the nursing home. That was kind of fun. But she, and I've always say that, like, don't ever give up on people and continue to pray for them. There's power in that. There's power in that.
That was like, just talking about family and things like that. And I don't know, like, as I'm sitting here in my head, it was like, how did you all know? Like, did she just openly say, like, I just don't want a relationship with God over the years? Like, was she just open about that? Or
no, I don't think it was. I don't think that she I didn't know her as long as Becky. We should bring her in here, shouldn't we?
Shout
out to Becky. Inquiring minds want to know. We'll do a marriage theme one.
I would just be interested to know. Yeah, because I just feel, I kind of.
I'll tell you this. I do know this. I think more than anything, she's just ambivalent towards it, and just not that she was angry and hostile towards it, just didn't think it was just on her radar screen. I think it was more of that, but God began to work in her in that, and and I started seeing some openings, and that she's leaning in that direction. She's thinking about these things, and so she had a bunch of misunderstandings about what it meant to be a Christian. I was able to clear that up, and she says, well, I'm ready to do that. And so that's and we what we do. And so that was like a really great Thanksgiving, but like literally she was in her mid-90s when that happened.
I always tell my youth girls, like, this is one thing just for me personally, like, while we're on personal things, but I always tell my girls, nobody is ever like, I don't want to say too far gone. I know we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, but like for me growing up, I just never thought that my parents were people that I needed to pray for. Like my mom, grew up in a Christian home. We went to church and all that stuff. So I thought she had all that figured out for herself. And then like with my dad, and I know he wouldn't mind me talking about this because we've already, talked about it, but my dad, he was just kind of stuck in his ways and he was just, rough around the edges, but soft-hearted dad. And he just kind of doing his thing, And so like, but I did, as I started to grow in my faith, I started, just to pray for my parents and just general things. But anyways, my stepmom actually is the one who started coming to church. She actually started watching a church on YouTube, and she was like, I wish we had something like that here. And I had just started going here, and I was like, you should start, try to come to our church. And so through her coming, my dad was able to come, and just watching him over the last couple of years, just his relationship with God grow, and he was baptized here, right the Sunday after Helene, and he was like, oh, I'm still doing it. I'm still pushing forward. And so just to see the change in my dad, and just I remember all those years thinking like, my dad is my dad, and God will kind of work on him, and that's his own thing to work out between him and God. I'm not going to bring that up. And I had Catholic, my great grandparents were Catholic, and we just never talked about God or anything like that. So I think sometimes you just don't really know when to insert and when, just kind of how to
and I think
navigate
there's some
those
wisdom about that.
conversations.
Like I said, with my friend that was so hostile, and I found this in ministry, not as many people are as hostile as you think. There are some that are very hostile these days, but the majority of people not so much. But still with that, like having a little discernment about, hey, here's an opportunity just an organic conversation for me to speak the truth about Jesus, something about the gospel, challenge them on that. And then, okay, maybe that's enough for today, but to stay after it, continue to look for those opportunities, love them, be patient with them, but pray for them through the whole process. That's like super, super important.
And my Olga is here at church because I invited her, and she said I was so annoying about it. Every Thursday, whenever we get ready, we'd leave work every Thursday. I'm like, we're having church this Sunday. We're having church this Sunday, and Easter is special to me because I told her, I said, if there's ever been a Sunday that you've even thought about coming, I hope that you'll make this Sunday it, because I knew we even talked about it back then. Just how important it was and how everybody's going to hear the gospel if they come. And so now she's been coming ever since. And so it is so important, just if you feel that nudge, and just the people that you work with anywhere that you are. So important to just talk about it.
And most people are not going to jump down our throats. I mean, we feel like they are sometimes, but they're really not. And shout out for that. Man, I love Olga. Glad she's here. Glad that happened that way.
So, when Easter rolls around.
There's just that whole, there's just just summing up the mat carrier thing, like, really the people we travel through in life are going to shape the direction and quality of our life. They really are, good or bad, right? And so as Christians, we need other Christians in our life. Now, that doesn't mean we ignore the lost folks, because we want to see them come to Christ. We want to point them, but we need those people in our lives, and we need to be that person for someone else. And it means I'm not going to be just a cheerleader. Of course, we're encouraging our friends, but we love them enough to speak truth, right? We want friends that love us enough to speak truth. And so they're not just being a cheerleader or an accomplice, giving us thumbs up or something God says thumbs down to, right? Because that's not good for anybody. That's not love. That's not helpful. And then therefore, going forward, we need to be mat carriers that are looking for these opportunities to point people to Jesus, praying for them, and partnering with the church. And man, God does great things through this. And that's what the story is. I mean, here's these four guys, and this is what's interesting about that. I just thought about this. The four guys that brought that man to Jesus that day were thinking his greatest need was to be healed, right? And that was all in their mind. They were thinking was going to be the case. But he left with that physical healing, but something with even bigger. And that spiritual healing of relationship with Jesus. And I got a feeling, the Bible didn't say anything else about them. It said they had faith in Jesus to bring the person, but I guarantee you those guys walked out being believers too, right? So if you see somebody raise your friend like that.
Say, if you weren't before, you are now.
Right. So, I mean, there's just a lot of neat takeaways about that. And if everybody in our church would be a mat carrier for somebody else, and like I said, if our church would just be that mat carrier for the community, I mean, I think that'd be great. So that's a big thing. That's a big deal.
Well, one thing you just highlighted, we'll go ahead and kind of move on to the next segment. And so one thing that you just said was that being a mat carrier means that you love them enough to speak truth. So we talk about how Jesus is the truth with a capital T, and the Bible is his true, living, holy word. And so in order to tell people the truth, in order to speak the truth in love, we need to know what the truth is. So that's kind of what dawned on me today during the service, we talked about studying the Bible. You always push with people to get a translation that you can understand, and then just read it because you can understand it. And so I kind of wanted to ask today because one note that I took away for myself is something that's hard for me, because that's what you were kind of highlighting. A lot of people are just like, well, I just don't understand it. I'm just not a reader. I can't take time to do it. And so one of the struggles that I notated for myself is because I feel like, because you sit here and you can, memorize scripture and you like kind of have a way of just kind of telling the stories where it's like, I would have never pulled that conclusion from that reading that I just did. So that's something that's hard for me, is feeling like maybe there's something deeper under the surface that maybe I'm not getting. Like maybe I'm just reading. Sometimes we just read just to kind of check off the box. Like, okay, I read that, but are we really looking into, what the Lord is trying to tell us through that specific passage and things like that. So that's one thing that intimidates me, is feeling like maybe I don't get as much out of it as other people do. So anyways, just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that person that you think so eloquent, or that pastor that sees those things, do you think when they first started reading the Bible, they had that knowledge?
Probably not, but for some reason in my head, I just feel like they do.
Well,
I'm just like...
No, they don't. No, they don't. Like, trust me.
Yeah.
Like, that's somebody that's been studying the Bible their whole life and teaching it and things like that.
Right.
And so they've built up a knowledge base about things. Like, so much in the Bible is understanding the context behind why this happened, what was going on when it did, or the cultural context. Because, like, I tell people all the time, like, when you read the Bible, read it like a human being, because the problems they dealt with then are still the problems we deal with now.
Right.
They might not have an iPhone, microphones, all this kind of stuff, but they had the same kind of problems with the relationships, finances, struggling with stuff internally, sin, same kind of problems. But the culture is different, and so learning to navigate that sometimes can help you. You learn that stuff over time if you put in the time. Yeah. And I always like to tell people, it's like, and you mentioned one of them, like, first of all, if you want to learn this stuff, like, get a translation you can understand. Like, it's a big thing around here. People think, the only Bible is the King James, and that's what Jesus carried. And it's like, it's not what Jesus carried. Yeah. And to me, that's just such a silly argument. If you want to use that and you understand, that's fine. But I want people to read a Bible in language that we can understand.
Right.
So, people all the time ask me, well, what do you read? And I teach most out of NIV. I like the 1984 version better than the newer one. But also, I've been preaching a lot out of New Living Translation lately. I just like the way it reads. So I've been reading that. ESV is good. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there that are good. But find one that you can understand and start to read it. Now, I am a big believer in getting a reading plan, because the shotgun approach, just open it and grabbing stuff and reading stuff out of context, is kind of hard. That's what's kind of been fun about this series, is taking people through the sequences of the Bible and trying to connect the dots, right? That's been kind of the goal. But get a reading plan and get a Bible you can understand. But here's something that's really, really helpful for your personal Bible study. Yeah. Get, like, the Bible I have here. I've had this Bible since 1991. Like, I've taped it back 4,000 times.
Wow.
It's got all my notes in it. I can't get rid of it. The maps fell out of it a long time ago. But it's all I've taught in it since 1991. Wow. And with that, though, it's a study Bible. Yeah. Okay, it's a study Bible, which means it has some notes. And I would encourage everybody, get a study Bible. Okay. Like, there's Life Application Bible. That's a good one. I mean, they have the NIV Study Bible. That's what this one is. But there's a bunch of them. But what they do is, like, if you look here, I know they can't see this online, but, like, they're notes here by verse. And so it'll tell you sometimes that cultural stuff. Okay. Or to give you a cross-reference back to something, because it'll say something like, oh, yeah, like if it's talking about Jews washing their hands or something, it would say, yes, in the Old Testament law, the purification rituals were important, and this is what Jesus is dealing with. So there's some things in there that if you'll use that Bible and use those notes, they're designed, oh, okay, I understand the context a little bit better. Cool. So get a Bible you can understand and get a study Bible, okay? Gotcha. That's really important. And then I always tell people, as you get a reading plan and you start reading the Bible, as you're reading it, it's getting into you whether you realize it or not. But as you're reading it, when you bump across those things that make you scratch your head and go, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? Well, okay, you write that down. Yeah. And have the due diligence to go find the answer. We tell people all the time, call us about things. Ask us. Like, so there's one, so I'm loving this right now. So you know Mark David Hollifield.
Yeah, Holloway. Yep.
Holloway, yeah, Holloway. I mean, sorry. Yeah, Mark David is like a super. And for those of you all don't know Mark David's I think sixth grade.
Sixth grade, yeah.
And like super smart kid.
Yep.
And he trusted
got
Christ. He trusted Christ
baptized,
last
yep.
year, baptized. But like now I've got him coming up like literally about every week he comes up with a question he's gotten from the message. And they're good questions.
I love that.
And so he comes up and he'll ask me something. And I'll say, hey, Mark David, that's a great question. And I'll explain it to him. And then he'll go, oh yeah, okay, I'll go check that out. And he goes back and he does that. And so he's learned, but it's fun because he's willing to ask questions.
Yep.
Hey, look, adults, ask us questions.
Yep.
I don't have all the answers. Sometimes I have to tell people I don't know what to do with that either. But, ask a question, go to the nth degree, just write it down and ask somebody about it. Now, another couple things on that. I think it's important for people to get in a Bible study. Do your own personal reading. But also get in a Bible study somewhere. Get in a life group. Kevin's got all kinds of life groups. People doing the sermon curriculum, and there's ladies' studies. We got these discipleship classes that are on all kinds of topics. Like I'm doing one right now on Wednesday night about how to overcome common obstacles in life. That's based out of the Bible, right? And those where we see the teaching on that. And so, like those things are helpful too, because as you're doing it, you're getting more Bible information in front of you. And so, like, for most people, if you spend time in church, you've learned the Pharisees where religious folks didn't like Jesus. Now, you don't know that right off the bat when you're reading, but you'll start to learn that, right?
Yeah.
And so as you put in the time, it will get in you. Now, here's another couple things, like be careful on the internet. Be careful, and let me put it this way, use reliable sources.
Yeah.
James Tallarico is not a reliable source.
Name drop.
Okay. Well, that's because all of a sudden he's beginning to be this traction in culture that people are sharing this guy, and he abuses the Bible. He's a quote pastor.
For those who don't know, that's what I was going to say. For those who don't know what's going on, just a brief synopsis.
He's a Democrat House member of state representative in Texas, and he's a Presbyterian pastor or something like this. But he's been on a lot of high-profile podcasts because this guy's kind of a rising, up-and-coming politician. Okay. And he's very eloquent. He's smart. I mean, he's a clean-cut, good-looking guy, smart, eloquent, very good speaker. Yeah. But he is taking stuff, just murdering the Bible. And it sounds good to people. Oh, yeah, good. Well, there's a pastor saying it's okay to abort my child. No, it's not. And he's literally making those arguments and things. And he's twisting scripture to do it. So you do have to be careful with where you go online and what you're looking for, right? Find some reliable sources. Like, for instance, this is what's so arrogant to me, and I may have touched on this morning. I ramble about all kinds of things. I don't always remember. But it's very interesting to me that for thousands of years of church history, Old Testament, New Testament, people will say for thousands of years, yes, we understand that this is wrong. And then all of a sudden we come along as, quote, enlightened Americans. And now we're like, oh, no. There's a different meaning for that word. Yeah. Okay, so thousands of years of church history, of people who actually walked with Jesus and heard him taught, who understood that and wrote that down, right. You understand that differently than they do. Like, come on, that's a little bit arrogant. Yeah. Well, that's a lot arrogant.
Absolutely.
And it's just like, and that should be a red flag. And so you got to be careful with the sources that you go to, particularly online these days, because not everybody that has a reverend in front of their name or pastor this is a solid
And like
teacher.
we've talked about before, people look for the 60-second sound bites and they go off of that. Right. So it sounds good. And there are certain things that I've listened to before. Like like I said, my mom sent me something one time, and she's always just kind of been like, your salvation is sealed and different things like that. But then she and her coworker ran up on this video, and everything that this guy was saying, it sounded so convincing. And she's just like, have I believed wrong my entire life? And I'm just like, no. But that's how they just take these scriptures that they found and they just kind of twist them. And but it's sad because there's a lot of people who aren't mature in their faith, and they don't read the Bible for themselves, and so they don't know. It's easy to fall into those traps. Yeah. And then you regurgitate that information to people, and then people are all confused and they don't know the difference.
So, you do. That's one of those things that with the internet can be a great tool, and we got all the stuff at our disposal, but you have to be very, very careful. And I see stuff I scream at all the time. I saw those interviews with him and other people like that, and I'm screaming at it like, no, that is not what the Bible teaches. And that's a ridiculous argument. But yet people get swayed by it. So you have to be careful on that. But, to sum up that, it is important to know the Bible. A good church, I love that. Jesus preached the word to them. A good church is going to preach the word. Paul told Timothy, preach the word, period. All of it. And that means you correct, rebuke, and you encourage. You need to be in a church that's going to be willing to do that. But you can't even evaluate that if you don't know what the word says yourself, right? Yep. So you got to read it. And here's the deal. That's why I asked you that question a minute ago. You look up to people, Natalee, and you're like, here's these people have all this information, and how do you see this and how you do that? Okay. we've been doing that for a long time. Like one of my pushbacks when God called me to ministry is like, I don't know enough to do that. I still feel like sometimes I don't know enough to do that. But like as you put in the time, you begin to read your Bible, one that you can understand. You're hungry. You write down. You take notes. You ask those questions. You're in a Bible study here. You're reading something. You got some reliable sources. You're asking those questions and getting them answered. Like over time, you'll start to pick up the information. Right. Well, you'll understand more and think more. Nobody starts off with this like, that person you look up to the most. I promise you, they were right where you were at some point in their life. Okay, so don't let that deter you. You can get there. You just got to put in the time. And that's why I said a lot of people just kind of throw their hands up. They're intimidated by it, and they don't read it. And they're just like, well, I'll just let the pastor explain it to me. Okay, well, great. The pastor's, if you're in a good church, pastor's going to teach the word and do all that. But you can understand it too. I'm telling you, these things are not all that like.
Well, and you said this morning in your message, the Pharisees knew the laws. They knew the word. They knew the laws. But that you said they still missed the bottom line. They still miss, the grace part. And
they're supposed to be looking for the Messiah, and he's sitting in the same room with them.
Right there, so that's the thing. You can know it all, but you got to apply it and live by it and all the things. So, all right.
So look at that. So two things, right? We need mat carriers.
Yep.
We need to be mat carriers.
Yep.
And we need to study the word and know the word, right? Because you can't point people to Jesus if you don't. You got to know something. You need to get this. And I want to beat a dead horse again.
Yeah.
Like read your Bible. You can understand it. You will begin to understand it as you put in the time. You got to put in the time. And a lot of people, just be consistent with it. It'll start to get in you. You'll start to understand more. You'll start to pick up more. You'll start to learn more about the culture. And when Jesus says this is what this means. And you'll begin to get that in you over time. So it'll rub off on you.
Yeah.
And ask questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. That's a good thing. I love when people come and ask questions. And like I said, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. That's a really, really hard thing that you're asking. That's a really hard scripture. People debate that.
Yeah.
But other times the answers are fairly simple, and it can help you. Oh, the light bulb comes on. Oh, that's what he's doing. So anyway, that's a good thing. So study the word.
Good.
Don't be intimidated, Natalee.
Right.
Read it. There you go.
We're all growing. We're all on the road together, just getting closer to the Lord and pushing into Him and knowing, growing, and going in our relationship with Him.
I pray so.
Yep. And so basically your bottom line today was that Jesus is the only one that can meet our greatest need, and that's to be forgiven. And so one thing that
I'm
we
gonna
definitely...
back up. I'm going to make it even more succinct.
Back up. I know.
Every good message, you need to explain what people need to know and what they need to do.
Yes.
So what do we need to know? Our greatest need is forgiveness. Only Jesus can meet our greatest need, right? And so what do? You turn to Jesus and you trust Him for the forgiveness of your sins, that He would meet that greatest need. And that means turning and trusting Him.
Yes.
I just love that. So that's the goodness, that's
awesome?
the grace.
He's made it that
all that
simple. Yep, exactly. And so as mat carrier friends and things like that, we're trying to, show people that is their greatest need. And so one thing that we definitely wanted to talk about today was, why is it urgent to make that decision now? For anybody, you talked about that this morning, anybody that's been on the fence about that, anybody that's unsure, you said it'd be an awful shame just to walk out of here today and hear all of the truths that were laid out today and still choose to reject that. So why is it such an urgent time right now for people to hear this message and to make that decision to turn and trust?
2 reasons. Life is predictably unpredictable. How many people got up thinking it's a normal day and it was their last day?
Right.
People sometimes think I've got all the time in the world. That may or may not be true. You might live being 102 like Becky's grandmother. You might die at 33. I mean, you just don't know. And the Bible always tells us today is the day of salvation, that when God is drawing us through the Holy Spirit, the time to act is now. It's not tomorrow. You may miss that opportunity. No, it's today. And so we're not guaranteed another day. And that's why Jesus says, look, you better be prepared. It's the story of the ladies and the ones who had extra, oil for their lamps, and the other ones that didn't. And when they walked, they missed everything because they were not prepared. They were not ready. And so being prepared means I've trusted Christ. Now, that's the urgency is that, because eternity is forever. Yeah. And how we respond to Jesus shapes where we spend eternity. And so they're not perfect people, but those who turn and trust Jesus for their forgiveness are forgiven, made right with God, and have heaven. Right. For those who don't do that, or who meant to do that, just didn't get around to it, they go to a place called hell, and it is not a party. So on one level, today's the day of salvation. People need to respond today. I love Zacchaeus. I always talk about that story about the wee little man. And Zacchaeus, when he's hanging out with Jesus that day, I mean, he's living a terribly sinful lifestyle. And all of a sudden he stands up. He's been changed by the grace of Jesus that day, having sandwiches with him. And he stands up and says, look, here and now. Here and now. He starts, saying, I'm going to pay back everybody. I wrong people. I'm going to pay it back. I'm going to give up half my stuff to the poor. But I love it. He says here and now. Like today was the day of salvation because Jesus was there and he saw the opportunity and he responded. And so number one, life is predictably unpredictable. You want to be prepared. You want to do that. But secondly, the second reason why people need to, don't waste your life. Yep. Because look, I believe strongly everything in the Bible, but that first sentence, in the beginning, God created. We are not here by an accident. And if in the beginning God created, he's still creating. That means he created you, he created me, he created everyone. And part of that plan for every human being is that we would come to be forgiven, that we would come to know him, that we would come to experience his plan and purpose for our life and experience what Jesus calls the full life here and now. Now, that does not mean a problem-free life, but it means the best quality of life of walking with Jesus, knowing him, experiencing his plans and purpose. Right. And if we have not trusted Christ, we're missing that. And what a terrible thing it would be. Now, I've literally had some stories where people came to Christ on their deathbed. I've seen a couple of those. And I'm like, man, that's cutting it too close. Yep. And I've seen more people, or they waited forever and then they came to Christ. It's kind of like, praise God, Becky's grandma came to know Christ. Yeah. But think of all those previous 90-something years she missed having the full life with Jesus. So to me, because how we answer that question shapes life today and in eternity, I mean, man, today's the day. It's urgent. It's urgent. You're not guaranteed another day. But also, you don't want to miss what God has for you today. Right? So that's what I would say about some urgency there.
Yeah, absolutely. Urgency. It's so much better. I mean, that's the thing. People, there's an old kind of hymn song my sister was listening to the other day, and it said, people try to tell me that, there's so much that this world has to offer and that I'm missing out on so much, not doing certain things with certain friend groups and things like that. But I'm telling you, literally, I can speak from personal experience. Since I gave my life to Christ, it's all changed and for the better. And it's not a life with Christ isn't one that's perfect and just without, you say, expect obstacles and opposition. You say that all the time. Whenever you're trying to live for Christ, just expect that to come. But then whenever you know the one that you're trusting in, you know that there's nothing that's going to come your way that you can't face, with God by your side. And then with these Matt Carrier friends, and then you've got the word that's going to equip you to get through it. And it's huge. And so, I just wanted to talk about just for a second, because this morning you had mentioned, and I am kind of going back here, but in my head all the time I think about how good God is and how good life with God is, and I'm like, how can people hear this message and not want a life with Christ, or not want to accept that gift? And I know that whenever you were talking about the paralytic man, you just mentioned this very briefly, but it still stood out to me. You said that in those days, in customs and things like that, they would look at someone like that and think that either he had sinned and brought that upon himself, or someone in his family had sinned and brought that upon his family. And so I think about just friends that I have and people that I've met over the years and conversations that I've had, and I feel like a lot of people today, we've talked about so many times, people feeling like they're a loophole to God's grace and things like that. But I just think that sometimes people may look at their past, even if they've had a past of addiction or, just different struggles that we have, just not living for Christ and things like that, and just think, I can't even come close to earning God's grace, or I'm not worthy for that, or they're like, I just want to keep living this way. One of my family members, I remember being 13 years old and talking to her about going to church, and she's just like, I've just got too much life to live. And they feel like that's going to slow them down somehow, or that, you have to jump through hoops to have a relationship with God. And I just always really try to wrap my head around, why people wouldn't want to follow Christ. And I don't know if you have anything. I wanted to ask, biblically, what you think about people who have generational, people call them generational curses and generational chains and generational bondage, and just people who have a history of addiction, people who have a history of sexual immorality, people who have a history of all of these things. Is there any kind of encouragement or biblical truth that you can offer to people? Like you just said, here and now, you have to decide that you want a relationship with Christ. But just anybody who's struggled in this path of life.
There are a lot of questions in there, but let me walk that back and kind of start this way. So, Jesus will deal with the subject of they asked him one time, who sinned,
Yeah.
this man or his parents? And Jesus, getting ready to heal the guy, said, neither. This is so that God's work might be displayed in him. And he heals the guy, and it's a big miracle, and it points people to faith in Christ, right? So, we've talked about this before. Like, if God's goal were to get even with us, I mean, we'd all be dead, right? If that was his goal. Now, there is the discipline of God, because God's a just God. There's the discipline of God. There's also the natural consequences of bad choices and sin. Like you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. That's just kind of how life is. And so, there is that dynamic going on in people's lives. Now, you talk about generational curses. Now, I always think about what a generational curse is. And when they say that, generational curse, well, and people imply God's cursing them for that. I look at a generational curse being simply a learned pattern that's repeated with predictable results.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean? So if I grew up in the home of an alcoholic father, and I've learned that life revolves around alcohol or drugs, that's just what we do as a family, then I've got a tendency to repeat that pattern. Right. And guess what? Generational curse, it ends up in the same place because that's what that leads to, right? And same thing, people can grow up in a home where mom and dad had a real dysfunctional marriage, and they learn that, and they roll into their marriage, and they repeat it because it's a learned pattern. Right. They repeat the pattern, and it ends up with predictable results. So sometimes, on that kind of stuff, like I look at the general curse, that's how I'd answer that, Each individual, though, is a fallen human being. That's what we call depravity. Yeah. Like, there is no one good, no, not one. I mean, we just got a heart that's marked by sin. And so, why do people not want Jesus? Why do they think, I think some people are deceived by the enemy, thinking that just like Eve was, that real life is over here. It's not following Jesus. That's restrictive. Right. Real freedom, real life is when you are calling the shots, doing what you want to. That's freedom. The Bible says that's actually the opposite. Jesus says anyone who sins is a slave to sin. Sin is bondage. Right. In the garden, when God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the fruit, he said, you're free to eat from everything over here, but you're not free to here. If you eat here, you die. There was death and there was freedom. Yeah. There was life and death there. And so I think sometimes we've been deceived, and so we think that life is somewhere that it's not. Now, most people, you go on down that for a while, they just keep bumping their heads into the wall and they can't find anything. Now, sad part is when people like that, they just keep going. They don't find the answer in Christ, right? Yeah. But I think, a lot of times people I think there's a lot of people that it's not necessarily that they can't believe in God. They just want to do their own thing. That's just that sin nature, that me monster thing in us. But, I don't know. I mean, it's.
And then that was kind of another thing.
And I probably didn't answer your question because I
was just like 10 questions in one, and that's why I'm sitting here like even during your sermons, like I try to take notes just as I kind of like have these thoughts, and I'm like, oh, it hits on that and different things, and so what you were just talking about is like people they just, or you were talking about how they hear the word but then they just like reject it. I think you had mentioned that earlier. And so something else that I wanted to mention, just because again we talk about culture, I think that's one thing even with my generation and things like that, they are so into pop culture, and I'm like so not. People will talk about, and I'm like, I have no idea who that is. Like people were sharing stuff from the Grammys and I was like, who even is that person? I have no idea. But anyways, I follow this guy on Instagram, and he's like I think his handle is like celebrity evangelist or something like that, and he goes around, he's got an organization, people will like donate money to have these Bibles, and they'll put like celebrities' names on them, and he'll go to these meet and greets, meet these celebrities, and like present the gospel to them basically. And one of them, I don't know, I'm just going to say a celebrity that will remain nameless, but he was presented a Bible to him because he had seen him on a podcast clip, and they were talking about, a lot of these celebrities will talk about theology and different things like that, and I never really knew that before, but they'll just, talk about their stance on it. But anyways, basically this guy just said, hey, I do believe that there is a higher power, but I'm just not with the Jesus thing, because if there is a God and that God wouldn't accept and love all of these people that I love so much. Like he said, I have so many people in my life that I love and I care about so deeply, and I know that they're good people. I know that they serve others, they give back to others and all of these things, but you're telling me because of a lifestyle choice they make that they would have to burn in hell forever because they didn't like choose you, so he's like, I just can't go with that guy. So he said that. And so I think, like you said, a lot of people look at it like it's restrictive or like it's a bunch of rules and things like that.
big misunderstanding on what love is, and like the aspect of God trying to call you away from that, of God telling you don't do that, is because he actually does love you. Like he's saying, don't go down that path. Sin's not good for you. That's harmful for you. It's just like, if when Jet came into your house first and you're raising him, and he's trying to play with a giant knife, or he's trying to reach up and touch the stove, you're going to say, no, don't do that. Why? Not because you're being restrictive, because you're trying to protect him from getting burned or cut, right? Like God does that for us as well. Like now, a lot of people just don't understand. They think love means just anything goes. The reality is, whoever that celebrity is, and God does love everyone. The proof of that is the cross. Right. Where, what do we say this morning? Christ died for sins once for all. Every person, whatever they're into, once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. Right. So he does love everybody. There's no human being that's not loved, right? He does that. And part of that love is calling him, you need to come this way. You need to move in my direction. These things I've laid out as sin, not because they're hoops to jump through, but because that's bad for you, that's harmful for you. So sometimes people just, when they say that sounds, I understand how their logic is working, but it's just biblically inaccurate. Yeah. But let me get back to something you said, that, because you said you're kind of puzzled by how people respond or don't respond, because, like I said, your life's been changed by the grace of God. You know how good God is, and how wonderful it is to walk in him and all that. Well, the reason it's this way is because, it's everybody's got to make a choice. Some will choose, some will not. However, Jesus told us it would be this way. Yeah. So he tells a parable. Remember, my definition of parable is a made-up story that makes a point. Yes. And he tells a story called the parable of the sower, where a farmer goes out and sows the seed. Now, Jesus is going to let us know later that the seed represents the gospel, the message about Jesus, the saving message about turn and trust Jesus. You can be forgiven. He meets your greatest need. Boom, through his grace. And so he characterizes the guys scattering the seed. And back then, they didn't plant furrows. They just threw it willy-nilly. Some landed on the hard soil, the rocky soil, the path, all this kind of stuff. Some landed on good soil. And so he starts talking about that, how there's the soil that kind of lands on the pavement, and it immediately doesn't do anything. Birds come and snatch it up. Doesn't even grow. Doesn't even take purchase. Yeah. And he said there are going to be some people like that. Their hearts are hard. They don't want anything to do with it. They just reject it. He said there's some others that are going to be kind of like the rocky soil, or it's going to spring up real quick. They get excited about it, but there's no, it just withers. There's no moisture in the soil, and it goes away. And so it's kind of like they kind of get, I'm kind of excited about Jesus for half a minute, and then they're on to something else. Others get going, but then they're choked out by the weeds. The Bible says that. And then he goes on to there's then that group that it falls on good soil and it produces a crop. And he just says like the seed is sown by the sower. He wants everybody to grow. Everybody wants to come to faith in Christ, but yet some people are going to choose to accept him, or some are going to choose to reject him. It's just, unfortunately, it's part of it. Jesus said it would be that way. And I think part of our job about being mat carriers is clearing up confusion. When you mentioned that celebrity, he's completely wrong. It's just like my friend I was telling you about. Like, he was wrong about so many things. I'm like, no, that's not at all right. Yeah. This is what Jesus says. This is what it means to follow him. And this is why I know he loves you, how I know he loves everybody, and why he doesn't want you to go there. So that's a big part of being a mat carrier, is clearing that up. But tragically, there are going to be some people that are just going to reject him, and that's tragic. But we should pray as long as they're breathing, because we don't know who that person is. We just continue to pray. We continue to look for opportunities and be a good mat carrier, pointing people to Jesus. So there you go.
We're going to keep trucking along, making disciples. And so, good talking to you today. I think that basically summarizes everything that we wanted to cover today. And so, always a joy talking to you and getting to dive a little bit deeper into Sunday morning sermons, and anything you want to talk about that we're looking forward to. I know you kind of highlighted it in the beginning, but just, like I said, things going on.
Toxic Empathy.
We'll link
Allie
it.
Beth Stuckey. Read the book. This book's good.
Yep.
But also, spread the word about Easter. Get excited about Easter. And if I could stress, please, 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 put it on your calendar. Just like everything, you got to make it a priority. Yep. You got to make it a plan. You got to put it on your schedule. It's just like anything important, because I believe any person who does this, it will be an Easter like no other. Yes. So I'm praying about that. 33 days of prayer and Bible reading, our 5 Wednesday services leading in that prepare us, and our Sunday morning. So it's a big opportunity. And being mat carriers, this whole like Wednesday night stuff, Sunday morning stuff is just a gold mine to invite
And
your friends.
that first Wednesday is March 4th, right?
March 4th.
Yep, Wednesday,
March 4th.
So
Yep.
mark your calendars for that Wednesday and then, the 5 after.
Yep.
So, yeah.
It's going to be
well,
good.
That'll be great. Awesome.
All righty.
All right. Well, we'll see you right back here next time. Thanks so much for joining us.